Well, it looks like the Mountain West might be making a move.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon to be mostly team-free, but until then, beloved and loaded Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review. Please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, Mountain West, Big Ten adjustments, are those needed, and more action in the bowl season all coming up on today's show. But the latest is that Jon Rothstein, who is maybe my favorite follow on Twitter ever, especially when it comes to college basketball, certainly he's number one, reported that according to a source, the Mountain West is in discussion with Oregon State and Washington State to join them as a basketball member for the 2024-25 season. That is not happening yet, but discussions are reportedly ongoing. I tend to trust Jon Rothstein. I don't think he would tweet something out if he didn't have it on good authority. So, would that be a logical move? Yes, absolutely. If you're Oregon State and Washington State, and you're looking at this realignment landscape and trying to find the best, most competitive home for all of your sports, there's a very real case to be made that for basketball, the best home is the Mountain West. Now, for Oregon State, I know that there's going to be a legitimate baseball consideration there because that has been their strongest athletic program over the last 20 years with 3 national championships. So, the Mountain West only has 7 baseball schools in it. It's not that deep. Not every school decides to prioritize it. So that team might have to find a home in a different conference. But this could all work. This could all absolutely make sense because there are a number of examples. You can start with Notre Dame. You can end with Hawaii, in which your football team plays in one conference and other sports play in another conference. I think there's even an example or two out there with some, super niche or specific sports in which you have a university with certain athletic teams that compete in 3 different conferences. Because for places, not everywhere has wrestling or not everywhere has hockey, for instance, or gymnastics is another example. So this cross-conference existence is pretty well founded in college sports. So I think this could make a lot of sense. But for the Mountain West, I think that this is a smart and strategic move. And here's why. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying in no way, shape, or form should I ever be considered an expert on dating. I'd consider myself the opposite of that. However, I think with the Mountain West, making these talks happen and trying to get them to join as basketball schools is trying to do here is a little bit like the guy who wants to go out with the girl doesn't want to, she might not have any other better options, and so she says, okay, well, you know what? Let's just use a high school example or college example. Let's do homework together, but it's not a date. Okay. You're not a member of the conference entirely. We're not going on a date. We're just doing homework together. Okay. You take that and then you try and finagle it from there to work in your advantage. So for the Mountain West, I don't think that they're looking at the potential of adding these 2 schools as basketball only members with the thought in mind of, hey, maybe one day we'll do this reverse merger. Maybe one day we'll have, a relegation system. I think they're making this as they're wanting to perhaps do this as kind of a first step towards getting Oregon State and Washington State to become full-time members of the conference. Now, that could depend on what the Commissioner Gloria Nevarez has to say on the matter, which I have not seen any comments yet, and I don't expect her to until anything becomes official. But I think that she has made it clear based on what she said during the college sports season that, they've got the scheduling alliance now with Oregon State and Washington State, but they're not members of the league. But if you're the Mountain West Conference, Would you want Oregon State and Washington State to be members of your conference? 100% you would. You would love for them to be full-time members, particularly in football. And if you were already, having them as members in basketball, that seems like a first step. You're not going out on a date yet, but at least you're talking and she's getting to know you a little bit. So I think that's where the Mountain West's head is at. I think that's a pretty logical place to be. I don't think it automatically means that one day Oregon State and Washington State would join it on the football side of things, because I think there is still an option down the line pending how this, legal situation plays out. And I keep an eye on it in the news, and you can follow me on Twitter at smalls_55 and whatnot for that. But keep an eye on the next few days. Feels like there are going to be more than a few things that kind of resolve themselves or materialize, or we get more clarity on within the next few days on that front. So I think it's a good move for the Mountain West. Now, this has not been finalized. This has just been reported that they are in talks to do so. I do think it makes some sense to Oregon State and Washington State, because to go back to the dating analogy, I mean, you are just hanging out and doing homework. You haven't agreed to anything. You haven't said, yeah, let's go get dinner and a movie on Friday night. You're just saying, all right, let's see how it potentially goes. And it gives you something to do, something to, spice up your Thursday evening, as it were. And I think for the Beavs and Cougs as well, basketball is not as high a priority, though Washington State basketball is off to a very strong start this year, and Oregon State looks at least improved from a season ago. It's not as high a priority. And so I think finding them a stable home where they're going to be able to compete, they're going to be able to compete at a relatively high level, I think that is a tangibly good step. But it's also not all the way committal on the football front, because what Oregon State and Washington State are, of course, trying to do is figure out, okay, how can we best position ourselves to be included in the next round of realignment? And yeah, the Mountain West is going to be a part of that. And I think that if they joined as a basketball only member, I think it would be, a step towards maintaining relevance. I mean, the Mountain West basketball right now is fantastic. And the conference that is most likely to pick up the Beavs and the Cougs in whenever the next round of realignment comes would be the Big 12. I think they've made it pretty clear that they're not going to do that right now, or they would have. And there has been no indication that particular move is coming. I think everything is, kind of settled on that front, pending what, Florida State, maybe they're trying to get out of the ACC. I have no idea. Honestly, I haven't, really covered that as much, because this is Locked On Pac-12, and Florida State certainly would not come to the Pac-12. I will say there was a hilarious joke one time about, it was just kind of like roughly flying around Twitter for a little bit, that Florida State and Michigan were unhappy in their current conference. And someone replied to it saying, I hear the Pac-12 is looking for teams. Got to find a way to laugh at something with regards to all this craziness nowadays. And that made me laugh, so I thought I'd share. But I think it's a move by the Mountain West that is not done accidentally. I think it is a strategic one to try and lure Oregon State and Washington State to eventually join as full-time football members. Do they feel that they'll need to? I think that depends on how 2024 plays out. Because if they're able to put together a good schedule and just serve as, tied at the hip independents, I don't know why that couldn't work for a couple of years. I don't know why that couldn't work for a couple of years. And maybe you try and rebuild the pack. I don't know. Try and build the premier group of 5 conference in the country. This could be worth exploring on the show one day. The Boise States and Fresno States of the world. You could grab, maybe 4 American schools and 6 Mountain West schools, have a 12-team conference. That'd be the best G5 league, certainly in the football sense. And I don't think it would even be particularly close. And by the way, in the context of the 12-team playoff, that could make sense, because the highest ranked G5 conference champion gets an automatic berth into the CFP. Something to think about. Something I might have to do a show about in the not too distant future. I'm just spitballing here, as is often the case. One of you is spitballing about the Big Ten, a question that I think warrants answering. Here's another question for you. Have you checked out Game Time yet? Because when you're buying tickets to your next big event, you shouldn't have to worry. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app, the only one that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchases. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know what you're getting a great deal without hidden fees, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. It is indeed time for what is always my favorite aspect of any show, and that's the mailbag, which is always open to you. YouTube comments. You can hit me up on Twitter as well at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions are wide open. This question from Bud. With the Ducks, Huskies, Bruins, and Trojans going to the Big Ten next year, what adjustments offensively and defensively should these teams make to be successful in their new conference? Conversely, would the current Big Ten teams be wise to make adjustments to West Coast football? This is a fascinating question that will play out on the field in 2024. Here's where I come down on it. If you're a head football coach, you have a particular style that you think works for you. Whether or not it does is something that plays out in your team's record every single year. And the 4 coaches who are going to the Big Ten, Kalen DeBoer, the National Coach of the Year. I think he knows what he's doing. Dan Lanning, who's won 21 games in the last 2 seasons at Oregon. Lincoln Riley, who's been to the playoff on 3 occasions. And Chip Kelly, who is definitely the least successful, at least recently, of the bunch. When I think of all of them as head coaches, they all have distinct styles. They all have traits and characteristics and elements to their coaching that I identify as, yeah, that's what a Kalen DeBoer team does. That's what a Lincoln Riley team does or doesn't do in some instances. These coaches have not just developed that brand of how to coach and how they view football and how they want to win football games, because there's more than one way to do it. It's like swinging a golf club. Certain fundamentals for every professional golfer are the same. But go look at Jon Rahm's swing and go look at Rory McIlroy's swing. They look nothing alike. They're achieving the same result, but they're doing it with a very different appearance. And each one is tailored to the feel and comfort and repeatability of those particular players. It's the same thing with coaching. Okay, Chip Kelly believes in running the football a lot more than Kalen DeBoer does. Lincoln Riley doesn't believe in playing defense the way Dan Lanning does. And it's not as much of a priority for his program. It never has been the way it is for Dan Lanning. It doesn't make one particular style right or wrong. It's just that each coach has a style that he believes is the best way to win football games. Jim Harbaugh wants to pound the rock and out-physical you. Ryan Day had to adjust a little bit because Jim Harbaugh kept beating him and Jim Harbaugh still beat him. So I think that for college coaches, they spent years, whether it's their time as a GA, assistant, position coach, maybe a head coach somewhere else, they've spent a long time developing their style. And I don't think that you're going to see teams radically change that just because they're playing games in a different part of the country or, playing against different styles of opponents. There's still going to be some similarities, but when you think of the Big Ten, yeah, you think of big physical football and a lot of great defense and some less than spectacular offense. Iowa is a great defensive team. They're horrific offensively, not bad, not below average. They are horrific. And that's why they're a good team, but they're rarely ever a great team because they can't play offense. And they've got the same head coach. And that's what Kirk Ferentz believes. He wins more football games than most college coaches. So I can't sit here and say he has no idea what he is doing. But for all of these guys, Lincoln Riley just made a great hire at defensive coordinator, UCLA's D'Anton Lynn. I think it's a fantastic snag. His teams, I still do not expect them to just suddenly become a defensive juggernaut. I expect them to be improved, but your head coach sets the style and tone that your team is going to play. And just because you're going to go up against a different style of opponents sometimes than what you've been accustomed to in conference play, I don't see any of these coaches making significant adjustments. I don't see them going in and saying, well, we need to play low scoring, non-explosive slugfest football. That's what they play in the Big Ten because I guess they just don't always know anything else. I mean, you just don't have great offenses over there. In the Big 12 for a long time, and I think still kind of remains the case, you haven't had many great defenses. It was like Gary Patterson's TCU teams could defend and nobody else could. Why? I don't know. It's just culture in the conference. So, and SEC teams, by the way, have historically been very defensive leaning, though that has kind of shifted. Like you look at Alabama, for instance, they were winning games 9-3 once upon a time. And now Alabama games are not that low scoring. They bought into offense because that's where the modern wave of football has gone. So I think all these coaches are going to keep their exact style. I don't think they need to change anything. It just comes down to matchups. Some matchups are not as good for a team because of a team's particular style. For example, if you are, let's take Lincoln Riley's USC team from this year. If you put them on the same field with Iowa, and they're going to play Louisville in the Holiday Bowl without Caleb Williams, interested to see how that looks. But if you put them on the same field as Iowa, I don't think that is a great matchup for USC. Because I think that if you put that game in November in Ames and you had, 35-degree temperatures, that's not historically where Lincoln Riley teams have thrived. But that's not going to cause a holistic change to what a coaching staff's going to do. That's going to cause a change to the game plan in the week. Right? If they're going to go play in 32 degrees in snow or 28 degrees in snow somewhere out in the Big Ten in November, then they might have extra run plays they put in. They might put in a new package. They might have, offensive looks that cater to their personnel that are different than what they, have always done, or maybe even what they would like to do, but is specific for that particular week. They're still not, though, fundamentally going to get away from what they do well, which for USC, for example, is throwing the football. Washington's the same sort of way. Like they went down, when they played Oregon State in the rainstorm, for instance, they knew it was going to be raining. They knew they weren't going to be able to throw the football the same way they could when, they went to Michigan State in September, or when they played Boise State and Tulsa in Seattle in September. They knew it wasn't going to be like that. You adapt the game plan each week. You don't adapt styles as a program. So hope that makes sense. If not, let me know. But interesting question there. And the same thing goes for the Big Ten teams. Iowa, reportedly could hire Scott Frost as their offensive coordinator. I think it'd be a really good hire because they need some upgrades offensively. And if they just had a competent offense, I mean, they could be a legitimate contender in the Big Ten, but they don't, so they aren't. But I don't think any of those Big Ten teams are going to change what they want to do. Just comes down to how the head coach views football and how he thinks he should win football games. Last thing before I get to the Independence Bowl, which is tomorrow, I am excited for bowl season. I know I'm a college football sicko, but guess what? You're going to be sitting around in the middle of January after the national championship thinking, oh man, I want to watch college football. Well, you're going to be able to for the next month. Might not always be the most games or the games you're most interested in, but there are two Pac-12 teams playing this weekend. Cal and Texas Tech is one of them. But there was another transfer that is technically a cross-conference transfer, I suppose. Oregon State has gone after their second Colorado Buffalo. They pulled away the center. Now they've pulled in the running back, Anthony Hankerson. I mean, if you're Hankerson going to a team that actually cares about running the football, probably going to be better for you individually. I think he's a solid player, nothing special though. If he's, a number 2 or 3 back to Damian Martinez, I think he got something there. I don't think it's a hugely impactful transfer, but I thought it was worth noting just because Oregon State, it can feel sometimes like, oh man, we're not getting any players and everyone's about to do all this sort of stuff. Here's the tease though. Angie Machado of Beaver Blitz, who does some great reporting, she tweeted that out and said that it was a surprise edition. I'm pretty sure it was her because there's apparently another name. I don't know who. I don't know what position. There's apparently another big name that's going to drop. And then there were some hilarious CGI or AI generated memes about spilling the beans and spilling the beavers. I got to tell you, it got weird in the Locked On Pac-12 mentions the other day. But hey, I'm always here for creativity. So definitely on the watch for that. Aiden Childs is going to Michigan State, and I think Oregon State's still looking for their first big impact transfer this offseason. But they brought in a couple guys from Colorado who, are nothing special, but are solid and will definitely be contributors for the Beavs next year. Have I told you about Prize Picks before? If you're an everydayer, then the answer is, of course, yes, because Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you'll watch the winnings roll in. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, which is what sets them apart. Your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if a player goes out in the first half, does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use that code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's pretty neat. prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Let's talk bowl game number 2 on Saturday. It's the Independence Bowl down in Shreveport, Louisiana, between my, jokingly, California Golden Bears and the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. 6-6 team out of the Big 12, 6-6 team out of the Pac-12. This could be a really entertaining football game. So when I break down every bowl game this season, I will start, of course, with what is on the line, because that's the question that a lot of people ask themselves. Like, well, why are you talking about a bowl game? Why do people care about a bowl game? What exactly are the stakes here? It's just a meaningless blah-diddy-blah. Yeah, I've never bought into that. I never will buy into that, especially in the lower level games. I understand it more for teams like Oregon, for instance, that wanted to get into the playoff and didn't, or Georgia or Florida State. But for teams that are starting at a lower starting point, that are trying to build themselves up, bowl games can mean quite a bit. So what's on the line in the Independence Bowl? Cal is looking for its first winning season and their first bowl win since 2019. That's a pretty big deal if you're Justin Wilcox. I can assure you, despite changes on staff and some transfers out of the program like Sam Jackson V and an announced transfer into the program in Chandler Rogers from North Texas, the quarterback, he is going to be extremely motivated to win this game. So too is Joey McGuire for Texas Tech. So here's a trivia question for you, and this is a doozy. Can you give me the last Texas Tech head football coach that had consecutive seasons with a winning record? The answer is indeed the great and late Mike Leach. This is not a program that has seen a ton of success at a high level over the years. This is a program that was seen in some circles as a dark horse Big 12 contender this season. They did not live up to those expectations. I think partially because their quarterback, Tyler Shuck, got hurt, who's going to play at Louisville next year. But both of these head coaches are looking for something in this game that their programs just haven't seen in a long time. And I guarantee you it matters to each of them. And the players who are going to be there and get the opportunity to play, I think it's going to matter to them too. So what to know about the game? Fernando Mendoza is going to start at quarterback, which I do still find to be a tad curious. They must really like Chandler Rogers from North Texas. There is good reason for that. So against Cal in week 1, he actually played a little bit. He was 3 of 7 passing with an interception. Then North Texas' starter, I believe, was injured or replaced. I did not check on that. But regardless, Rogers took over in about game 2 or 3, and he threw for over 3,300 yards this season, 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and had 6 passing games of over 300 yards. 6 games. That's over half of the season for North Texas, who I believe made a bowl game this year. I don't recall, but he's going to be, it appears, the quarterback next year. I don't know what Fernando Mendoza does. Mendoza has had a really nice season for Cal. They clearly feel that Rogers has got the higher ceiling, but hey, is it a given? Clearly not, because last year's transfer did not end up being the starter by the time the season came to an end. That was Sam Jackson. Injuries were a part of it, but he was outplayed. Mendoza was the best of the three by the end of the year. That much was very clear. So I think when you're talking about, well, what's everyone's motivation level going to be? I think Mendoza wants to show that this should still be his job, and Justin Wilcox is clearly open to competition as seasons go on. So that's something to watch in this game. Now, Tim Blush, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, which is ironic given the mailbag question I'm going to end today's show with. He is going to be calling plays. Tim Plow, before he goes, again, I heard these names said by Wilcox in the press conference talking about this stuff, but didn't jot down pronunciations as I could, which again, I'll talk about later. But Plow is going to be head coach at UC Davis. He's going to remain as the quarterback's coach for this game. Not something you see very often. In fact, rarely seen. I think the timing of this bowl game being so early in the bowl season, it's one of the first bowls that we'll get to watch this year. I think that's a part of it, but that's not something you see every day. Now, on the other side for Texas Tech, when Tyler Shuck got injured, Baron Morton took over. He's thrown for 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions this year. He's the highest rated quarterback recruit in the history of Texas Tech football. He's a redshirt freshman, and he's someone who I've seen a little bit this year. He can make some plays, can do it with his arm, can do a little bit with his legs as well. Here's the question that I have in this game and why I am, once again, going to ride the Bears. Texas Tech this season is allowing 168 yards per game on the ground. Cal head coach Justin Wilcox said they're hopeful to get Isaiah Afonso back. But if you're a team that struggles stopping the run, I got news for you. You're going to struggle with Cal's offense. And I think that Cal's offense will be too much in this game because Jaden Ott, and if you have Isaiah Afonso there, Jaden Ott, by the way, first team all Pac-12, deservedly so. He was outstanding. I believe in conference games, Jaden Ott was the league's leading rusher. No one really knows that because he was playing at Cal, but I know that because this is Locked On Pac-12. So for Jaden Ott, this is an opportunity to have a big game, and when he does, Cal tends to succeed. So you got Mendoza in there, who I think is a little bit better than Baron Morton, at least at this point in time. Jaden Ott could have a big game. I think both sidelines and both coaching staffs in particular are going to be plenty motivated to go out there and win the football game. I think Cal's going to win. They're an underdog by 2.5 points. I'll take that all day. I like the over 57.5, Cal plus 2.5, Bears 31, Red Raiders 28. My prediction for the Independence Bowl. Wrapping up today with a Locked On Pac-12 mailbag question. This again from Bud, who described himself as an every morninger, a take on a term that I coined here at the show, an everydayer. I'm kidding. The network coined the term, but it's a great one, and I appreciate all you everydayers out there. He says, I'm always impressed with your pronunciation of players' names, such as, see why this is ironic? Because, I didn't take as many notes as I should have on a couple of the names on the Cal coaching staff. But I'm impressed with your pronunciation of players' names, such as Uiagalelei, Amavai, Triquez, and Mathudi. You seem to say them flawlessly and smoothly. And if you're unsure of the pronunciation, you mention that. Where do you find the correct pronunciation, and how do you master the technique? So when it comes to funky names, I always go to SIDs and the game notes that they put out if they're publicly available. I also try to read stories that are often out there on how to pronounce a player's name and, how the family pronounces it. That's where you really want to go. But I mean, I know a good number of people in the sports media world. So, I'll ask around about how to pronounce this and that. And then learning to pronounce difficult names as a play-by-play guy, that's every single week. I mean, there are always a couple names that, you got to say out loud a few times, or maybe say to yourself as you go to sleep, like they're just kind of, you know, techniques and practice. And I think really just the variety of names that I've seen and, you know, had to say in broadcasting is just kind of, you know, made it easier when I come into this space and, you know, say a name like Uiagalelei all the time, because it's just practice. It's just practice and repetition. And I try to, you know, find the most credible, close to on the ground primary sources possible for what the correct pronunciation is. And then I just kind of hone it in. But love the question, though. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.